Okay, hello everyone, and a warm welcome to this lecture series. We have with us Professor Sudhir Kumar. Let me formally introduce our speaker for this lecture. Professor Sudhir Kumar Sutar is a political scientist and public policy scholar whose research explores the intersections of rural development, agrarian distress, and state-society relations in contemporary India. Currently an assistant professor at the Center for Political Studies in the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. He brings over a decade of teaching and research experience in political economy, comparative public policy, and international relations. His acclaimed book, Dilapidation of the Rural, Development, Politics, and Farmer Suicides in India, published in 2022, offers a critical analysis of agrarian crisis and the politics surrounding farmer suicides. Dr. Sutar has also published widely in journals such as the Sociological Bulletin and Journal of Social Inclusion Studies, examining themes like hybrid political agendas in farmer movements and the role of civil society in regional development. Earlier in his career, he has co-authored multiple books. Some of the foremost of them is Theories of International Politics in 2011 and Comparative Politics and Crisis of Governance, The Russian Conundrum in 2011, reflecting his broad engagement with both global and local dimensions of governance. Dr. Sudha's current work continues to integrate how rural transformation, social movements, and policy discourses shape democratic processes and social justice in India's evolving development landscape. A warm welcome to you, Professor Sunil, and Professor Sudhir Kumar, and thank you for taking out time to engage with us on this Saturday morning, despite your other engagements. And so I have a few questions for you, and what I do is that meanwhile I'll stop sharing my the poster so that everybody can see you. Uh, yeah, and should I also pin you? Yes. Okay. So my first question to you is so the title of this lecture series, which is the cyclical conversations between theory and practice. So we would first want to know from you is that what, in your opinion, is the connection between theory and practice?
Firstly, Sanchita, many thanks for inviting me. It's so kind of you to invite and give this generous introduction. I really sincerely appreciate. And it's also good to see younger colleagues taking such initiatives, talking on issues which are otherwise not on the top priority of policy agenda, especially in an era of urbanization, industrialization, FDI, and so on and so forth. So, thank you so much. And I'm really delighted to be here today. Regarding the question that you posed, that's actually a I would say moral as well as academic conundrum that we also face. And with my colleagues, we keep on having this discussion about what do we mean by theory and how do we bridge the gap between theory and something called the practice. And so far, just like many other academic debates, I think we are still struggling hard to find an answer. But I think the best part of this question is the question itself, because this compels us to think in newer directions. This compels us to think of alternative ways of knowing and thinking. Uh, when we talk about theory, firstly, theory has multiple meanings, and as we have disciplinary boundaries functioning as echo chambers, so there are theories which belong to a particular discipline. So we have theories in natural sciences, we have theories in social sciences, and within social sciences, we would have economic theory or theories in political science separately, and so on and so forth. Besides, there are also various meanings of what we call as a theory. So the meaning of theory in, for example, literature and humanities is considered to be different from what do we mean by a theory in, say, natural sciences, or what some people would also call the hardcore science disciplines. In social sciences, now we have started focusing on something called the middle range theory, which may not be a hardcore theory like natural sciences, but also not something which is like the literature. So, but what makes these theories different? And I think that's a critical question to answer and look at. Because the answer to this question lies in the second part of your question, which is what we call as practice. So, in fact, the real contestation, I would say, begins with the very meaning of practice. So, for example, natural sciences would argue that uh, we need to build upon empirical facts, and also some people would call it a reality. And you don't have any such hardcore reality or facts when you talk about humanities or social sciences. So, uh, and then we had a long debate in social sciences, in philosophy of science, called the fact and value dichotomy. So, can we have an understanding which is bereft from any value structure, or is it essential to have a discipline, a field of knowledge which is value ridden in itself? So the fact value dichotomy constituted this debate for a very long time. In many disciplines, for example, especially in natural sciences, the way it has evolved, there is a focus on uh, facts defined in terms of empirical realities. Whereas in literature and humanities, there is a focus on other aspects of human life, be it emotions, be it compassion, be it attachment, and so on and so forth. In social sciences, there is a big dilemma. The dilemma is that when we say practice, the fact is that there is no one practice. Besides, how does one understand practice is also a subjective inquiry. Something which is a practical thing for me to do can be a very unethical thing for you. Something which is a desirable thing for me to do could be an undesirable thing for somebody else. So, I mean, if I give an example, democracy is a value for some people, some societies, some groups. But for many others, democracy can be seen or can be projected as a hindrance in the very process of development. So this dilemma is a constant dilemma between what we call as practice and reality. Now, and this goes on and on. Now, in the past few decades, the domain of what we call as the practice has actually acquired newer meanings. Now, what do I mean when I say that? So, with the evolution of university system, the current education system, the whole idea of theory and understanding what we call as a practice, which means how the society operates, how individuals behave individually, or a group behavior, or a collective behavior, this entire idea with the emergence of the new university or research system, which I mean we call it as a Weberian science, this new idea of understanding science and societies uh, was a domain of academic world, universities, colleges, institutions of higher learning, and so on. So the 20th century, we know about different kinds of research in social sciences and in natural sciences, which was taking place in the universities. But after the Second World War, it witnesses a turn. And the turn is the rise of three different kinds of institutions. One set of institutions are those which were continuing, for example, universities and colleges. The second set of institutions were known as the research institutes which were affiliated, associated with the government or could be with the private agencies. Another set of academic institutions were what we call as the think tanks. And the last category in it, which becomes a formalized entity after the Second World War, what we refer to as civil society. Now, these three layers of institutions, the think tanks, civil society, and research institutions, they started looking at the whole idea of reality from a very different vantage point. Now, what is that vantage point? That vantage point is basically when they started asserting more on an output based understanding of practice, which is more embedded in day to day realities of people, their struggles, or maybe what state needed in in its policy discourse. So, and then we have a new debate taking off where the university system and philosophical studies and so on, they were seen as doing something called normative theory, whereas all these other institutions started focusing on the empirical aspect of different empirical realities of the social world. And I think this dichotomy creates this binary of theory and practice. So, uh, I would like to look at it from this, quandary or conundrum. I hope I tried to touch upon your question.
Yes, definitely. It was beautifully explained. And also, it was nice that you could also bring in how natural science departs from the social science and other humanities subject on that. But now coming to more of practical examples. By practical, I mean they would be theoretical frameworks, but related to some of the topics or the themes that you've been exploring for the past few decades as a part of your work, and which is about the agriculture movements primarily. I mean, there are other things that you've been exploring. But to coming to that and then seeing the theoretical and the practice connection, my question to you is, Professor Kumar, is how have Indian agriculture movements navigated the tension between the theoretical frameworks? And it could be about the agroecology movements that have started recently, or it could be the year long and the decades of debates around food sovereignty, about food security, or the entitlement theory, and the practical struggles on the ground. If you could throw some light on that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question. Uh, because I'm glad that you use the word agrarian movements. Because if we look at, forget about the global landscape, if we look at the India as a unit, I mean, there is no one set of agrarian movements that we see. And there are multiple ways, regional ways in which different movements have emerged. And the first question, if I try to base this answer of the second question on the first question, so there were movements which were actually deeply embedded in the idea of a theory. And then there is a departure where there are movements which are emerging claiming that, okay, we are not interested in theory, we have day to day challenges, and we want to have a movement which actually caters to these day to day struggles of farmers. Uh, and the first aspect of it, for example, when the farmers' movement was emerging after the 1950s and 1960s, and which was closely related to the communist parties and their ideology, it was functioning within a larger ideological framework. Now, theories also have this danger of converting into ideologies at times. And that's what, these movements ended into. So the ideology itself became an overpowering framework to understand the rural and also to envisage how the rural or the agrarian should look like. And both these aspects of the rural agrarian society were largely determined by what is called as the farm based variables and factors. So the understanding of agriculture was largely revolving around the farm size, productivity, the cost factors, and other what is called the rational choice understanding of farming. Uh, and in this understanding of farming, the focus was largely on those who were the marginalized group, especially the laborers. Now, a focus on laborers also is likely to have an impact how a movement shape itself, because then if there is a contradiction between the demands of the labor class and the demands of the landed classes, or the intermediary caste and class groups, or the small landholding size groups, uh, in this dilemma of choosing which group to mobilize, the focus of the communist movements was largely on the landless laborers. And the demands and agenda was also focusing on the requirements of these extremely marginalized groups which was working in the farm sector. The other major agenda was the land reforms, which was seen as a structural reform aiming at poverty eradication strategies and also helping the cultivators and other classes. But gradually, as India grows, the land reform took off for some time and then gradually got derailed. And the communist movement continued to focus largely on the labor classes. Uh, then comes a shift in 1980s when the groups and regions which were the beneficiaries of the Green Revolution started demanding more and more state incentives for the individual farmers, and which results into a collective struggle, what many people also refer to as the new farmers movements. Now, this second set of movement was actually not, uh, in fact, the one fundamental principle of these movements is that they claimed that they were not ideologically inclined and they were, in quotes, apolitical groups. Now, which is usually a myth at times, because when we say that, even we tend to become political. Apolitical is in itself is a political subject. Now, there were different groups which were emerging in different parts of India. So we have some movements emerging in Western UP and then in Maharashtra, in Karnataka, and some parts of Tamil Nadu. And ideologically, if we look at, though all three were mobilizing farmers, but the focus of, for example, the farmer movement in Maharashtra, Shetkari Sangathan, was largely demanding a more liberal and open agricultural economy rather than an agrarian sector which is state supported. Whereas KRSS and BKU in Western UP were demanding more and more state support for the farm sector. But both of them were not in favor of structural reforms in agrarian movements, which was the case with the communist parties led movements. Now, if we look at this division in the three different sets of movements, we will see that they were following three different kinds of agenda, where one is embedded in what we call as a theory, the other two were focusing more on what is called as the practice. And this dilemma goes on for a very long time. I mean, till 2020, when we see the rise of, the second phase, third phase of the farmer movements in India, which I have referred in some of my writings as the hybrid movements. Now, what are these hybrid movements? Where actually theory and practice converges again. And the best example of this convergence was that when the Sanyukt Kisan Morcha as an organization was constituted, it had left wing farmer organizations, new farmers movement organizations, and also the civil society organizations. So all three came together and they tried to bridge this gap between theory and practice in a movement. How successful that was, that's a different question. But I think this is how the farmer movement in India has emerged eventually. Yeah.
Yeah,
Over.
correct. Right. So I think you've very well pointed out to this tension. And now, and you briefly mentioned about one point, and I would want you to elaborate on that, which is about, if I can talk a little bit about the policy theories. Is that how then these, in what ways have grassroots movements shaped or disrupted the academic and the policy theories of agrarian change?
Yes, I think that's a hard fact which we are still, finding difficult to digest, I believe. And which is that there are two factors involved here. The first is that with Green Revolution, a new aspirational middle class within the peasantry emerged. And the aspirations of this new peasantry were quite close to the aspirations of the other urbanized middle classes, which we were seeing earlier as something in contradiction to the rural society. Now, this new aspirational class also wanted to have all those facilities, access to different services and goods, which were otherwise considered as more of a reality of an urban phenomenon. One. The second aspect is that the large farmers, whom the left movement for a very long time did not see as their alliance partners, with the increasing family and division in the landholding size, gradually were reduced to the small and marginal farmers. Now, in other words, the rural landscape changed in terms of class structure. It radically changed in terms of class structures. The third aspect is uh, the the caste dynamics, which were not recognized as uh, not recognized as an independent force while understanding rural society. They emerged as a very forceful force. Now, in both ways, the the manner in which rural society had undergone a change and the way it reshaped the very idea of electoral politics in India, I think academics were quite late in understanding that. Uh, of course, there was a realization that there was an economic change which was taking place. But this economic change was largely seen from the perspective of rise of informal economy. Also, there were debates about the new emerging middle class, but how this new middle class was emerging in number one in rural areas and number two, what were its aspirations was something which I think the academic world did not really closely engaged with. And I think it is in the only in the past 1.5 decades, perhaps, when academicians have started realizing that the rural landscape is not what they presumed it to be. It has undergone a significant change. And I mean, if you look at the farmer protests which happened around Delhi, and some of the people who used to say that these are not farmers, you will see them eating pizza, wearing jeans, and living in air conditioned homes. I mean, that had shown actually how we imagined the whole idea of rural. For us, rural was only poverty ridden, spatial areas which were muddy, smelly, chaotic, unorganized. That's how we looked at the whole idea of village or the rural society, which was caste ridden, divided. But the farmer movement had shown that no, the rural had multiple layers. And somehow the academic analysis was unable to capture those nuanced realities of the rural. I think uh, social scientists have started realizing it, but we are still struggling hard to come up with different theoretical perspectives on understanding it. Yeah, Sanchita.
Yeah, on that note, since you've ended it with that we are still struggling to theorize, I would want you to basically tell us, or what do you think around that, if what it would mean if we had to theorize agrarian movements, not just as resistance to the state policy, but as sites of co-production of knowledge, where practice and theory, they are both mutually constitutive. I know
Yeah,
it's a
that's
difficult.
actually that's a very interesting formulation. The one of the factors which has emerged in the past 2 decades in rural agrarian sector is the rise of civil society organizations. Of course, civil society organizations are not new in India, and they have been in existence for the past, I mean, 50, 55, 60 years, I mean, since independence. But in the past 2 decades and 2.5 decades, we saw how they became part and parcel of policy process at the national level. Uh, and that process of, both groups, academicians and civil society organizations speaking to each other started taking place in the first decade of the 2000 this century. But uh, in what ways this engagement can happen, how that theorization can happen, I think that is still a challenge. Now, what do I mean when I say that that is still a challenge? Firstly, I think we need newer conceptual categories to engage with, which I think we are lacking. Our conceptual categories are predominantly those categories which came up in 1970s and 1980s. We have not yet overcome that conceptual hangover, if I may say so. One. And secondly, one major aspect of this is the the entry of what we call as the everydayness of the rural and agrarian society, which I think somehow the academic world has not really engaged much with. And one of the reason behind that is uh, a lack of focus on field-based studies, field-based analysis. Uh, if I look at it from the civil society perspective, I think civil society has its own challenges. And one of the factor which is emerging today as a major challenge is, of course, the issue of finance as well as the state support. So, with the state support gradually being withdrawn from civil society organizations and also emergence of multiple checks on the activities of the civil society, I think they also feel constrained in terms of engaging with the academic world. I believe in such a scenario, it is necessary to have a more networked societies, initiatives like yours, or there are many other initiatives. For example, there is a, rain-fed agriculture in India network. Uh, sorry, Revitalizing Rain-Fed Agriculture Network (RRA) network, and then we have network of uh, Rural and Agrarian Studies (NRAS), and there is a small network with which we also work in JNU called Rural and Agrarian India Network. Then you have Foundation for Agrarian Studies. So we need more of these kind of informal networks where we get into dialogue with each other with an open mind, uh, willing to consider conceptual categories which could be new conceptual categories to explain these realities instead of just hanging over to the already existing conceptual categories. And I think it applies to both the academic world as well as the civil society organization. So networks can emerge as an intermediary group in between, a bridge in between, which can help us in bridging this gap between theory and practice.
My last question to you is very similar to the way you've ended the previous question, is about this rethinking, is about this, how can the study of agrarian movements contribute to the rethinking of the theory and practice debate, and not just in the agriculture space, but also in the food, agriculture, and nutrition nexus more broadly.
Uh, this question can be seen from two perspectives. One is from the perspective of political economy, and second is the everydayness of it. So when you talk about food, for example, and linking it with academic understanding or the policy circles, I think we need to accept this fact that food uh, is witnessing the whole idea of food is closely related to the political economy associated with it. And this political economy need to be figured in while understanding uh, the whole notion of food. So what we eat, what we get in the market, what is being produced, it may appear to be an independent choice, but actually sometimes it is not. It may appear to be a rational choice, but sometimes it may not be the case. In fact, it is a social choice which is made within constraints, and these constraints come from the state support, the social worldview, and above all, the role of global factors in it. So, one thing is that I think we need to focus on the political economy of food and agroecology both. Second is that when we say political economy, does it mean that individuals or groups or collectives, communities, they have no role to play in this process? I don't mean that. They do have a role to play. Now, how do they play that role? Now, this aspect is an everyday negotiating aspect where different groups and collectives engage with these political economy factors, the state, the multinational corporations, the uh, agricultural scientists, and their own requirements. They navigate between these four factors. So it's not that when farmers are growing something or when they are eating something or other groups when they are eating and growing something, they are simply responding to what is happening at the macro level. No, in their everyday life also, they negotiate, renegotiate, struggle, and try to redefine this. The question is that how does this redefining happen? I think we need to engage with that question. So the plate which we have in front of us is a political entity which comes to us through multiple factors of political economy, negotiations, and struggle. It doesn't come to us as a natural given. So, for example, the moment you see something in the plate, let us say if you are eating basmati rice, the first thing comes to mind is how much pesticide has been used in it. Now, if you look at a beautiful red tomato, it comes to your mind, perhaps it is a color covered tomato. Similarly, if you look at other fruits, the first thing that comes to your mind that strikes is that what if it is poisonous? Or if you eat something and you get a different taste, the first thing that comes to your mind now is that, oh, perhaps it looks like natural and organic, which was not in your worldview 20 years ago. I mean, there was no organic distinction and there was no chemical distinction, but today you have this distinction. Why? Because we are negotiating, we are responding to that situation, and we are struggling hard to, navigate a path through it. How do we do that? That's a question I think which one really need to engage with through a more field-based ethnographic research. And I think then only we can, come up with these bridging role of networks and groups. Sanchita.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Sudhir. I think it was a beautiful conversation, trying to understand the theory and practice debates and connections and the tension, and also bringing in, looking at it from the agrarian movements and how we need to revisit or rethink or redefine the way theory and practice can both blend in together and what it requires. You spoke about the networks and the civil society interventions. So thank you so much. And it was lovely to hear you speak. We have a couple of participants who have still stayed on with us. And thank you to everyone who could make it to this lecture series. If there's any question that you would want to ask to the speaker, you may unmute yourself and directly ask the question, or you want to put it in the chat, you can. I can read one comment in the chat which says a few more words and insights of farmer protests in Delhi. So I think he's meaning to like he wants to hear a little more about the farmer protests. Do you want to share a little
Well,
more?
I think that's a
I know
it's a big
can
topic for a
topic,
discussion.
yeah,
I think you need to have a separate discussion on it.
discussion around it.
Uh,
Yes, I
but
know.
just briefly, I can say that it was a movement of a very different kind. In what sense? That I mean, for the first time in the history, we saw this kind of a movement, which where people occupied the national highways and made it a site of protest. So it was not a political site in that sense anymore. Besides, one more thing which I mentioned during discussion is the kind of hybridity that it brought in. So the ideological division which dominated Indian agrarian landscape for a very long time, this movement tried to bridge that gap. Okay. And thirdly, and most importantly, this movement, with the help of its civil disobedience, peaceful organization, and disciplined movement, was able to achieve which nobody had ever thought of, which is that a government which was run by the largest political party in the world with an absolute majority of government was forced to rethink about the agenda. And at least for the time being, it actually took a step back. Plus, this movement also inspired movements and protests across the world, especially in Europe. And after this movement got over, I think some of you must have seen the protests which erupted in France, in Germany, in Hungary, in Spain, in Austria, multiple ways of protests in Latin America. I think if we look at it from an Indian perspective, it was one of a kind of a movement which actually, I think, after the Gandhian movement, it was the only movement which created such a global impact. So, of course, it had its own limitations. It was not able to come up with an agenda, perhaps, which would cater to the requirements of all the groups in the rural society. Besides, it didn't engage with the question of agroecology or environmental challenges and so on. But I think these are the limitations of every movement. It can't actually take into account all the factors. But I think it was a good beginning. And it should be seen as a continuum. It should not be seen as a one-time event that happened. Rest, as I told you that I'm coming up with a book which will be available in the market on this in some time, maybe in 10 days or 15 days. And some of you, if you are interested, you can look at that and we can talk about what I intend to say in that.
Do you want to share the title of the book here?
Yeah. The title of the book is Farmer Power, this the 2021 movement, the state and agricultural reforms in India. So it will be available, I think, on Amazon very soon. Penguin is publishing it. And luckily, fortunately, with some discussion, we have been able to keep the cost reasonable. So I hope it reaches out to a larger audience.
Sure, and we'll also see that we can organize a talk with you around the book so that it also kind of has a wide reach among the audience. And
Thank you. That's nice.
many people are able to engage and learn from some of the debates and the arguments that it put forth in the book. So I think there is one more. No, it's an appreciation post from Vijay, whose question you addressed. So
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. Any other questions from the audience? I know it's just a few of them, but still, nevertheless, it's always nice to talk and interact in a close group. So,
Hi. So,
yeah.
good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning,
So,
Prashant. Yeah,
Hello,
go ahead.
Prashant.
sir, so I had this one question, like you said that we are shaping the notion organic things like they were like 20 years ago, they were no such thing. So how this notion is shaping the, so that I can observe that this is also being like used by, like, this notion is also shaping with the help of this capitalism. Like I'm right now I met with my friend's place, and I just saw a packet of, like, this is some packet over there. This he had ordered from Blinkit or somewhere. So it is written Desi over here and all these things. And similarly, we see like when we order something, they are like organic certified and all these things. But at the same time, I think like the benefit is not reaching to the farmers. Actually, it is like the companies, the MNCs are able to capitalize it, but the real benefit of these things are not reaching the farmers. So what are your points, like views on this?
Yeah, thanks, Prashant. I think there are uh, there are initiatives by the government to actually encourage farmers to get into this field. So you have a promotion of natural farming, and you also have initiatives like the FPOs, farmer producer organizations, and then more emphasis on cooperatives and so on and so forth. But I think all of these initiatives, they may not be very effective unless and until there is a vibrant discussion between the civil society organizations and academia. Because, as you said, that this is not helping farmers but helping the MNCs. Now, when you say MNCs, and so how do you bring people power in front and make sure that it reaches to right people? I think we need an alternative set of institutions to get in this process. And then who can be those alternative set of institutions? I think these can be independent collectives. And that's where the role of civil society organizations, networks, academia becomes extremely crucial. Um, I mean, that's how I look at it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Professor Kumar, is uh, so I was reading this guidelines that has come out. I mean, Vasan, the group Vasan has actually helped government of Madhya Pradesh draft the guidelines, the SOP, which is with respect to procurement of kodo and kutki, the small millets. And they are trying to redistribute them through the midday meals programs and all, and they are procuring it from the FPOs, the farmer producer organizations. So although, I mean, yes, there is a lot of scope for improvement, but nevertheless, it's a good start at least. And apart from government of Madhya Pradesh, I think there's one more state that has also kind of tried to introduce these coarse millets and do bulk purchase and procurement from the collectives or the organizations like the farmer producer organization. So yeah, I feel it's a good start.
It is indeed, indeed. But we need to have multiple stakeholder approach when we are looking at these organizations. I think that needs to reflect in the policy realm. I think that's where the gap lies right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like recently, sir, actually, I am from Bihar, so like it's agriculture-led economy over there. So like recently, I also saw that, like, for example, makhana, this foxnut. So like almost 80% of the of India's foxnut is being grown in Bihar only, especially in this Mithila region.
Mm.
But like few years back, this makhana was not that famous. But now we see that lots of big brands, they are promoting that this is a healthy snack and alternative to all this uh, fast food and this snacks and all these things. They are promoting this. But at the same time, we can see that there is now they have reduced the taxes, this uh, taxes on all the things. But on makhana still they are taxing. The government, I checked recently, they are taxing something around like 5% on makhana still. So these things, like, we need to like bring in focus for the farmers, especially here.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely.
Correct. Yeah,
Yes.
correct. So I think we can close this. So uh, thank you so much again, Professor Sudhir. It was lovely talking to you. And thank you for the participants who could make it and joined us and made this discussion more enriching. Thank you. And we look forward to your book. and congratulations. And
Thank you, Sanchita, for your kind invitation and having me here. Thanks to Prashant Vijay for joining in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.